What's going on, guys? LuckyChief7 is here to give you guys my thoughts on Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, the manga, specifically the manga, not the movie. The movie's going to be its own little discussion video sometime within this sometime. Not exactly sure when. Sometime within this week, I'll talk about the movie. This discussion video is more so regarding the manga. Originally, Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 was launched under the title, Tokyo Metropolitan Cursed Technical School in Shueisha's Jump Giga magazine. It's primarily dedicated to stories that are really, really short and condensed and whatnot. I wouldn't say they're one-shots, per se. 3 to 4 little chapters. It's kind of where Jujutsu Kaisen falls. A couple examples I can think of, besides Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0, is Kuroko's Basketball Extra Game. And there was one other manga series I remember too, that was done by Ichiro Oda, the guy who does One Piece. One of his assistants did a manga series too, That's where Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 debuted, and it was from April 2017 to July 2017. Yuta and Rika were the first characters created, and they were intended as a pair for the story. Gege had that shit planned out. And you can tell that based on the story, it's accurate to that. Whereas, if you're looking at other mangas, and you're seeing, when the story ends, things don't line up, and they say oh, this was the plan all along. It kind of gives you that red flag signal of going wait a second, no, that doesn't make sense. With what you said before and what you say now, it's two different statements. But Gege here was spot on. Another point I want to address here with Volume 0, and it's one a lot of people often ask: when can I read Volume 0? Since Volume 0 was conceived long before the main series, you could technically read it first. That's the thing. Before Jujutsu Kaisen was even a thing, this is what we had. So if you wanted to dive into Jujutsu Kaisen, if you haven't heard nothing about the story, you could dive into Jujutsu Kaisen 0 first. And see if you really like the story and the characters, and that can help you jump into the main story that is Jujutsu Kaisen. Let's tackle the crux of the story, and that revolves around our MC, Yuta Okkotsu. Yuta is essentially, a teenage boy who was a cursed victim, haunted by Rika Orimoto, his childhood friend / love interest, that was tragically killed 6 years ago after she was ran over by a truck. They made a whole big promise too. Yuta and Rika are the heart of the story. They make this promise to one another that when they get older, they'll be married and they'll live, I don't want to say happily ever after, but together forever, if you will. I think that whole scenario is fascinating because those are kind of the last words that Rika imparts onto Yuta, and that traumatizes him all the way up until his high school days. And he goes through a severe case of PTSD, almost to a point where he has no social skills. Because of having that malevolent presence there, Rika's willing to murder anyone who hurts him or even attempts to get close to him. That's how severe the situation is. And that ultimately leads Yuta to get apprehended by the Jujutsu Kaisen, where it's led by Gojo, and he handles his case of execution. And if you're able to correlate the two connections, because we all know in the main series, Gojo does something similar with Yuji. Here, kind of this is the base idea, where you have Yuta instead of... As opposed to executing Yuta, the opportunity to him is given by Gojo, to where he can try to gain control of the curse and hone his skills. so that one day Yuta could use it for good. That's ultimately what is being suggested to Yuta is, hey, you don't have to die. You don't have to succumb to death and, pushing yourself away from others. If you really want to do this, I can help you. Try to hone in your skills. One day, you can gain full mastery and control over this. And that's something Yuta takes into account. And you see this too, because he thinks about it and he understands that, yes, I want to see if this actually does work out. Which gets into a few interesting little details, because he's not exactly welcome. Like Maki, Inumaki, and Panda, who at this point in the story are first years, they have some reservations about him. But ultimately, he's not accepted at all. Everyone looks at him and they're like, oh, you're cursed. Like, do you honestly think things are actually going to turn out that way? And the first mission that's given to Yuta is that he has to team up with Maki. They have to go to this elementary school to find some missing children. And they're able to do that after they get swallowed up by a huge giant curse. But it's a very pivotal moment for Yuta, because you see how shy he is, you see how reserved he is, how doubtful he is because of his upbringing, because of what happened when he lost Rika. Like, a lot of this stuff's going through his mind. And Maki's the one who asks him what his resolve is. Like, what does he want to do? And giving so much thought and consideration into that, Yuta says that he wants the desire to be alive, to find a reason to live. And I know some people want to say that's kind of generic and that's kind of like a shonen trope, if you will. I actually think that's kind of refreshing for a shonen protagonist. I really, really do. Because oftentimes, it's always, believe it, or I can do anything. Yuta, down in the dumps, you could say, yeah, it's the underdog trope. But rather than it kind of being goofy and trying to rub it off like it doesn't mean anything, you're kind of in this position with Yuta where you're like, you feel for him. And you kind of want to see him succeed with him. Man, there's so much shit going on in Yuta's mind. And you just want things to go well for him. You really do. I think a good comparison you could bring this up to is like how Deku was in the very beginning of My Hero Academia. Though I would argue probably Yuta is a lot more tragic in this case. Because yeah, for Deku it's like he doesn't have quirk, but Yuta it's like super traumatic. It's something where people could actually go through this. He stated what he wants the most as the desire to be alive, and through that determination, he calls upon Rika's fully manifested form. And they're able to escape, safe and sound. And the big purpose behind that mission was desires. That's the big crux of that mission with Manga, is for you to discovering what he desires the most. But it doesn't just stop there. It's one aspect for sure, but there's a lot more things that happen to you throughout the story. Another big part to Yuta's character also comes with the next mission he's given, which is with Inumaki or Toji. I think it's Toji, right? Togi? I think it's Togi. They both have to go to the shopping center that's about to fall apart, and there's a shit ton of curses that need to be dealt with before the building comes down. And one of the big things Yuta learns in this particular mission is how to work together with them and how to trust them. Because even though by this point he's been at Jujutsu High for several months, Inumaki was an individual that Yuta really didn't get to know a whole lot of. Because within those several months, we've only seen a little instance of him training with Maki. That more so derives from after that first mission here. So in this mission, it's more about Yuta working together with someone, and also really coming to understand his team. And that's a really, really huge thing for Yuta as a character. It really is. Especially seeing where he is when this story starts and seeing where he is. I want to think this is chapter 2. So when you get this point in chapter 2, it's like, whoa, okay. And I think that's another big pivotal thing. Is the purpose for this mission is trust. It's about trust and teamwork is the biggest thing that Yuta learns. The Night Parade of 100, I think, is where things get really, really crazy. Like, you have no idea. A lot of what Geta wants to do is test Rika's power. And ultimately kind of have the power for himself. Because, he wants to eliminate anyone who's not a sorcerer. And kind of, in a sense, kind of be like Magneto. Like, you know how Magneto was in the X-Men? Where he just wants to do what's right for his people. And anybody that's not like him can be eliminated. It's kind of like that mindset. I wouldn't say it's like super original, but it's like, alright, you kind of get an idea of where Geta's mindset. You kind of get somewhat of it. Though he's kind of portrayed in a more maniacal form, which some people could argue is a downside to the story. But when you're dealing with 4 chapters, and that's the only somewhat weak link to the story, I think it's fun. How this benefits Yuta is rage. And I say rage because by the time Yuta gets there, his friends, Maki, Inumaki, and Panda, they're like on the ground. They've been defeated by Geto, and he's filled with all this rage and all this disgust at what happened. And this is where you kind of get to see the dark side of Yuta. The side that you didn't really get to experience in the first few chapters. It's like you kind of get it somewhat at the end of chapter 3. And chapter 4, it's like, whoa. Yuta Okkotsu. He's able to gain a grasp of through this rage and disgust towards Geto. Yuta is able to gain control of Rika's spirit and kill Geto. And the fight goes to such a degree to a point where Yuta realizes that if he has to, he will sacrifice his life just to save his friends. And we see that in the story. Because when push comes to shove, he does realize, if this is the only option I have left, I will take that. It's during this fight, we actually get to see a concept that's sort of been done, like the whole power of love situation. Like, when it comes to love, love is a medium that a lot of stories have. But very rarely is it ever portrayed like this. We always hear about the power of love in stories, and it's especially in anime and manga. But we never see it like this. To where love can be represented as a curse. And that was so fascinating to see. That was so fascinating to witness within Volume 2. And you can see that throughout each of the chapters when Yuta's talking about Rika, and when he's just thinking about everything that's happened with his life. It's like, whoa. But there's one final thing that Yuta has to go through, and that's acceptance, which revolves around Rika, tying all this back to the beginning of the story. He knows his friends are over. He has his nice little moment with them. You see Rika waiting, and Yuta realizes that it's time to go, that he has to depart to the afterlife as a dedication he made to Rika for all eternity. And that's when you get a twist in the story, where we come to realize that Rika wasn't the one that actually cursed Yuta. It was actually the other way around. Yuta was the one who actually cursed Rika. And this was set up all the way back in the first chapter. Like at the very end of chapter 1, through this little line of dialogue, Like, Yuta throws it out as a possibility. What if I'm the one who actually cursed Rika? And Gojo does reference that in the final chapter. And you see these little clues here and there in Volume 0 where when you notice that, it throws you off at first, but then when you see the seeds that were planted in the story, you kind of take a step back and say, that was incredible. Personally, I didn't see it coming. I'm sure some people saw it coming, but for me, it's such an interesting twist on the whole trope because you're thinking, because of what happened, he's cursed. But no, in reality, he's the one who cursed her. And that's because of his lineage. And that he has this insane amount of cursed energy, which kind of shows you just how powerful Yuta is going to be as a character. Learning about that, I think, leads us to a very touching moment. I mean a super, super touching moment. Because he feels so remorsed. And knowing this truth, Yuta has so much remorse. When the curse does get undone, you see, like, Rika. Like, the Rika he remembers. She tells him that even though all this stuff happened, you know, she was happy to spend that time with him as a person than she was when she was at home. And you see this super touching, emotional farewell that Yuta and Rika have for one another. And you're kind of just thinking, damn, that's so touching. It really, really is such a touching experience. And in a way, you know, Rika's able to pass on, and Yuta now is able to move forward in life and find a reason to live. And continue living as a special grade sorcerer at Jujutsu Kaisen. There's so much to take away from Volume 2. Like I said, it's a story of desires, learning about what purpose you have when it comes to desire, what purpose you have to trust, what purpose you have when rage ensues, and of course, acceptance. There's a lot that can be taken away with the story. Now, let me just say this. As incredible as this 4-chapter story was, I do think it would have been cool to see Panda have a bit of an interaction with Yuta in a similar fashion to what he had with Maki and Togi, but I did thought it was actually pretty amusing that Gege threw that in as a joke. Like, what? I thought I was going to get my moment of spotlight with Panda. The little jokes I think Gege makes, it kind of shows you his sense of humor as an author, kind of what he views the readers would probably have in this. I think that's kind of fun. Something I think is super interesting about Volume 0 is there wasn't a plan to ever get Jujutsu Kaisen 0. There really wasn't. And Gege states this in the postscript of the volume, where the story's reception and how popular it got is what led to Jujutsu Kaisen being created. And that's the key thing to take away from this book, is that without Volume 0, you would have no Jujutsu Kaisen. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is this series of Jujutsu Kaisen, we would not have had it not been for this. And I think that's incredible. My final thoughts on Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 is that it's a story that showcases what love can be when it's derived from it, and just how it's able to shape Yuta's character. You know, from seeking desires to better understand who he is as an individual and how to continue living. Like, I'm honestly at a loss for words. I really, really. If you can get a reader to feel so much from your protagonist, just like with what Volume 0 did, then you know you've done a great job. You really have. And I think overall, in terms of my rating for Volume 0, I'm going to have to give it an amazing plus. It's not a perfection. It could have been, but there are little details here and there like I said, I did wish we kind of got to see something between Yuta and Panda, very similarly to what we got with the other two students. And that's kind of all I have to say when it comes to Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0. So, let me know what you guys thought about Volume 0. How do you feel about the story? How do you feel about Yuta as a character? How do you feel about the love story between him and Rika? And just his journey as a whole. So that's pretty much all I have to say until I talk about the movie. With that being said, you guys, that's pretty much it. I'm Lucky27. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more Jujutsu Kaisen, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.